Hi there, you have made it to lesson 4 and we are getting ready to write our next standalone paragraph. So your first paragraph, you wrote your basic academic paragraph. You wrote your E1 as personal example. In this paragraph, your E1 will be evidence from a source. So you've already gone through these notes, you've passed this quiz, and now we're getting ready to draft out your standalone paragraph using evidence from a source. So here is the assigned source material. I've left it there for you. You can see that. You can go ahead if you want, you can download it, print it. But I want to remind you that back in lesson, let me go back here, back in what lesson was that? Lesson 2, one of the things I had you do was to use your ChatGPT and Quillbot accounts to write 2 summaries of that article. So you might want to go back, you've saved those to your Google Drive, you might want to go back and reread those. But of course, I would also recommend that you read the article. That would be very helpful, I think. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at this. Now, like your previous standalone, the directions will tell you that you're going to do some brainstorming. Pull this up here. That you're going to be doing some brainstorming by asking it some questions, and then you are going to respond to one of these 2 prompts. And you're going to be making sure that you're using the assigned source material as your E1, and you're going to give a full attribution and the central idea and all that kind of good stuff. Remember, you can use evidence from this article or assigned source material as either partial summary, paraphrase, or an integrated quote, or a combination of those. So you also want to look at Rusty's paragraph and how he integrated a source, his source from that semester. I've also given you this marked up copy of the source. And whoops, that's not the copy I wanted to show you. This marked up copy of the source. And I've made that where you can also download that. But what I want to do is I want to go through this marked up copy with you, even though you have 2 AI generated summaries. Hopefully you've read the article. I still want to go through it with you to point out some things. First off, to begin with, and oops, we got a issue here. Sorry about that. Yeah, I did not want to go there. Here we go. All right. Let's see if I can do this again without clicking on anything and taking us away. So first off, the first thing I want you to pay attention to is I grabbed this off of ProQuest. So it's not in its paper form, it's in its digital form. And so when they do that, they don't always apply the correct mechanics and punctuation. So I'm going to go through that with you so you will be sure not to lose any points in clarity or correctness. So you'll notice here's the title. Alarmed by AI chatbots, universities start revamping how they teach. The title should always be in quotation marks when you use it in the text, when you use it in your citation. And I want you to also look at the punctuation. Notice the capital A, but the small letter B, and then capital C, U, S, R, H, T, and T. It's very common with standard title capitalization. You capitalize each letter of each word, the first letter of each word, with the exception of prepositions or articles. In this case, by is a preposition. Now, this is the ProQuest URL. I'm going to actually show you on the directions here in a little bit, or on the Canvas assignment page, a truncated version of this. But I wanted just to show you here that this is from the New York Times. We're not going to be actually using this in your works cited. In fact, let me just go back and show you real quickly. If you click on correct MLA formatting, if we click on this page, you'll see that I have put it in the correct MLA version. So it's going to be Hyung Kali, that's her first name, and then you see alarm by chatbots. Now I keep getting from uh, Grammarly that AI should not have the periods. That's a style choice. I know Chicago requires the periods with abbreviations and some others do not. So what I'm going to tell you is be consistent. The way that this title is provided with the New York Times article, there are periods. So you might be asked to change that. I would probably just leave it unless you're working with a style that says not to. And then we have, you'll notice the New York Times is in italics. Then we have online to indicate this is a digital source. The day, month abbreviated, and year of publication. Again, you might get something funky from Google Drive or from Grammarly. Just ignore that one. This is from the web, and then the access, and then your day of access. And by the way, I've also provided for you the in-text citations. If you're using summary paraphrase and direct quote from Kali Hyung, then it's just going to be hung in the parentheses. Notice no page number, it's digital. And then if you are going to quote somebody that she has quoted, we call that an indirect quote from the author. You provide the author's first and last name, their credibility, and then you use QTD period in hung and no page number. Okay, so let's go back to the source. The New York Times, we always put the New York Times in italics. Now what I have here is the full text. So many news features, when they are printed, particularly when they are printed in databases like this one, digital databases, they fail to indent paragraphs by 5 spaces. However, you should indent all your paragraphs by 5 spaces. That's really important. And you'll also notice that some news features will have paragraphs that are only a sentence long, like this one right here. That is not applicable to academic writing. We always indent our paragraphs. We always have paragraphs that are at least 4 to 8 sentences long. So as you read along here, I wanted to point out this little mark here. This Anthony Allman is a professor of philosophy at Northern Michigan University. Now, why is this important? Well, or why do I highlight it? If Holly had just written, while grading essays for his world religions course last month, Anthony Aumann read what he said was easily. If we just used his name, he has no credibility behind that. We're like, who is he and why do we care? So pointing out that he's a professor of philosophy, that he works at Northern Michigan University, this is what we call credibility, or his credibility statement. Go on. I'm not going to read this to you because I know you have the summaries and you can read it yourself. So here, one of the things I wanted to show you, here Colley is quoting Mr. Aumann, right? So this is his exact words. So you'll notice here we have the quotation marks, and then we have this little thing here, he said. This is what we call a tagline, okay? So the tagline, or sometimes we call it the author tag, is indicating who is saying what. Notice where she's put it. She's put it in the middle of the quote. We don't do that in academic writing. We should always put taglines before. So let's say, for example, you wanted to quote this quote in your paragraph. You would say, Anthony Aumann, professor at Northwestern University Philosophy Department, tells, always present tense, Huang that, quote, what's happening in our class is no longer going to be, quote within a quote, here are some questions, let's talk about it between human beings. It's like, who does this alien robot think? Or what also does this alien robot think? End quote. And so notice you would move that, you would take out the he said and all that kind of stuff, and you would move it to the front of the quote. I have a line here that says, the text above this red line is what we would consider an introduction to her feature article. It doesn't contain the any of the main ideas yet. She's just introduced us by giving us this little scenario with Professor Aumann. Right, next, I have highlighted for you the central idea of the entire article. The central idea is what the whole feature article is about. In an essay, we call the central idea the thesis statement, but this is a news article. It doesn't have a thesis statement. So she has written, across the country, university professors like Mr. Aumann, department chairs, and administrators are starting to overhaul classrooms in response to ChatGPT, prompting a potentially huge shift in teaching and learning. So when you write your attribution in Kelly Almond's 2020, what year was this? Hang on a minute, let me go back. In her 2023 New York Times article, Alarmed by AI Chatbots, Universities Revamping How They Teach, she explains how, leaders in higher education, how colleges and universities, remember we want to paraphrase here, are dealing with students using artificial intelligence, which is creating new moves, or which is requiring them to change how they teach. Something like that. That would be the full attribution and the central idea. So what you always do is you always tell your reader who hasn't read this article, before you give them your actual evidence, you want to say, this is what the article is, author, date, title, source. This is basically what it's about. That's the central idea. Okay, so we're going to move down here a little farther. And I have a little note here. It says that these two paragraphs are going to be considered the first main idea of the article that supports that central idea. And it's about what is the impact on public education, or in public education with the advent of AI. And then we're going to move down here. And I have these two paragraphs. Notice they're really little tiny paragraphs, represent main idea 2, which is what's the impact on college education. So I got to see, sorry about this. I did this early in the summer. Okay, so the first two, this number 1 main idea is public education in general. And then we get a little more specific. This is the impact on higher education. That would be colleges and universities. I have a little note here. This is a news feature, not an academic essay. So while she's using contractions, she has written don't as opposed to do not. You're going to avoid contractions. Okay, so let's say that you wanted to quote this little paragraph from Kelly, then you would have to change, you would leave it because it's in quote, but let's say you're going to paraphrase this, you would be careful to replace the don't with a do not. Here's another, within this paragraph here, here's another quote and a tagline. And again, notice that the tagline, Joe Glover, Provost of the University of Florida. Provost of the University of Florida is his credibility. But let's say again, you wanted to quote this, you would move the tagline before. So you would say, Joe Glover, Provost of the University of Arizona, tells Hong that, or tells Hong, quote, comma, quote, we try. So always remember that news features don't have the same rules as academic writing. We always move that tagline before the quote. Here's another use of contractions. Again, you want to avoid contractions in academic writing. I have another note here. The above paragraph and the one on the next page represent main idea 3. So far main idea 1 is the impact AI is having on public education in general. Main idea 2, the impact AI is having on higher education. And then our third main idea that supports the central idea of the whole article are the types of AI and the potential to mislead people. So we have that paragraph, so that's the third one. And then we come to these next 4 paragraphs. Some of them are kind of small, which it represents the fourth main idea, how specific institutions, now we're going more specific, not just higher education in general, but specific institutions are addressing the problems that come up with AI and student cheating. Move down here again, I just want to point out to you, we have another quote and we have tagline at the end of the quote. Again, if you want to use this quote, you're going to move your tagline to the front of the quote. And then Sid Dobrin has his credibility as the chair of the English department at the University of Florida. Here's another one. And in this one, the tagline is being used. Let's see, what do I have? What's my note here? Is it this one? Yeah. It's the individual credibility and tagline. And notice that there's not a quote. Instead, it's a paraphrase of what Friedrich Aldama said, is the humanities chair at the University of Texas at Austin. So notice that this is a paraphrase, but nevertheless, you still, even if you paraphrase, you have to attribute the ideas. These 4 paragraphs here, I have a note over here, represent main idea 5. This is a specific example of a specific professor that is coming to terms with AI using I can't say his name, Aldama's experience. And then we come down here. By the way, you can see we've got taglines that should be in front of quotes for academic writing. We come down here to another 4 paragraphs, which represent main idea 6, which is more examples of how other higher education institutions are addressing AI, including teaching students about AI and updating honor codes. One more time, you can see we've got a signal phrase that should be moved up. Okay. And then we come down to here. This is a signal phrase tagline with individual's credibility. It's been blended again in a paragraph, a paraphrase and quote, but it is moved to the front, which is good. And then we come down here to this 2 paragraphs represent main idea 7. It's basically summarizing the potential for AI detectors. So as AI products and tools develop, there's also people who are then developing the detectors. So it's like here in our department, we have a whole list of different tools we can use. We can run student work through the detectors to determine if a student has relied solely on AI. So for me, I'm okay as a policy if you have about 25% of an assignment, a quarter of an assignment might be AI driven. I'm okay with that because I know it's going to happen. Other professors, you can't have a smidge, so you got to be careful. And obviously we have a policy in our department that if, more than 25% of your assignment is AI generated, then that's going to impact the grade on that assignment. Here we come down. I wanted to point this out to you. Here we have a signal phrase or a tagline that is tagged to a paraphrase. But in this case, Lizzie Shackney doesn't have a professional title, but she still needs to be identified. In this case, she's being identified by her age and the fact that she's a student at University of Pennsylvania Law School and Design School, it looks like. We come here. These next 5 paragraphs represent main idea 8. Now we are linking to Shackney's attitudes and her use of AI and why she's using it. Again, you notice we've got the signal phrase, which should be at the front. What do we have here? But she has qualms. Oh, I do have a note here where we have Miss Shackney, and I should have noted it up above with the first professor. the use of gendered relational titles, in other words, Mr., Mrs., Miss, or Ms., we generally don't use those. Now, she used them at the beginning. I should have pointed that out as well. These are called gendered relational titles. And um, in academic writing, we typically don't use them. So we identify a person by their first and their last name and their credibility when we first introduce them in our academic essays or research papers. And then from there, we go just to their last name. We typically don't add those gendered relational titles in front of their last name. It's just, and and I know that there's a sort of a socio-cultural political reason behind that. A lot of it has to do with an academic publishing. We, back in the 50s and the 60s, when there were fewer women in higher education, it became a standard to practice that so that there wouldn't be any inherent bias against their research if they were, someone recognized them as being a woman. Nowadays, that's less of an issue. I mean, there really isn't a gender bias against someone being a man or a woman in terms of their publication, but it's just now become a habit that we introduce a person by their first and last name, and then and their and their credibility, and then from then on out, we just refer to them by their last name. It's just something you want to do. Now, in news writing, that is not the case, so we can see that here. And then here we have, what do we have going on here? Oh, it's just, again, the use of contractions. We would want to get rid of those in academic writing. And so, um, what do we have here with the rest? Okay, that was the rest of the main idea. We come down here. Now, when you get a copy of an article, a newspaper or magazine article or journal article from like a ProQuest, and you do print it off, you're going to get a bunch of this other information that isn't really necessary for you, but you will notice, here's her name, Kali Hung, and then New York Times, and then here, of course, is the date of publication. But you'll notice there are no page numbers, and the reason why is because it is a digital source, right? So I have on here one more time, this is a citation format as opposed to the one on this document, and you always want to make sure New York Times is italicized. So that is your overview of your article. Again, you have already written or have already produced generated 2 AI summaries of the article. Back in lesson 2, I've given you the correct formatting. It's all there for you. I've gone through it. I've shown you some things you need to pay attention to, some differences between news features and academic writing. And now you also have that marked up copy. So that's your video. I hope that was helpful for you getting your head around this assigned source material. Remember, you are required to use it in this assignment for E1, and you will also be required to use this article a second time as evidence, integrated evidence into your final essay.